New Zealand's rugby players have blocked a private equity firm buying a stake in New Zealand rugby. This is a really interesting and a developing story. So let's get into it. But firstly, I'm Tim. This is Egg Chasers. And we're pretty much putting videos up here every single day now, if you include the podcast at the weekends as well. So for that reason, hit subscribe, like, share, and leave your comments if you love rugby too. I mean, even just leave a comment if it's to say, Tim, you look a bit like that ex-Bournemouth football manager, Eddie Howe. I've had that a few times, and that's fine as well. Whatever you want to say. It's all good. But let's get into this story then. Silver Lake, a private equity firm, have offered 465 million New Zealand dollars, that is 236 British pounds, not a small amount of money, for a 15% stake in the income-generating elements of New Zealand rugby, so all of its commercial elements. The union, New Zealand Rugby, are saying, yep, we're well up for this. They need the New Zealand Rugby Players Association, i.e. the players themselves, to sign it off. And the players have said no. They've written a letter, which I'm going to go through. I will pick out some pertinent points. I'd highly recommend reading the whole letter yourself. It's great. But what I would say before I do is there's two phrases when I first read this that I thought. One was that phrase, teach a man to fish and you can feed him for a day. Teach a man how to fish and you can feed him for a lifetime. And also the other phrase, there are some people that know the cost of everything, but the value of nothing. That one in particular really resonated when I read this. So let's have a look at the letter then. And there you go. New Zealand Rugby Players Association's response. So I'll just pick out some of the important bits. They do acknowledge that the New Zealand Rugby Union is not in a great way financially, albeit they say you're not in a bad way financially either, because they point out you'd built up quite significant cash reserves over the last few years, and surely that's a rainy day fund. And what's the last year or so if not a rainy day? They point out you haven't exhausted all of that money yet, so do we need to be selling this off? They do also acknowledge, we need to raise more investment, but they do come up with alternative ways of doing it without selling off some of the family silver to Silver Lake. So, when they go into their reasons, separating New Zealand Rugby's income-generating assets into a separate company and providing funds for new investment to that company is logically separate from the sale of income-generating assets. So as long as the capital for investment is raised in some form, investment in new growth opportunities can be pursued. So they're basically saying, maybe we need to do private equity and sell a stake in our product. Maybe we don't. And I think it's so shrewd that the players are the ones saying, prove to us there isn't a way with avoiding this private equity. Because I understand that shiny new toy, that big wheelbarrow of cash that someone's just going to deliver to you seems so appealing and so easy. But you've got to take a real long-term view and go, unintended consequences and missed opportunities in the future and costs that we might regret in the future. And again, this is the New Zealand Rugby players doing this, not money men. I absolutely love how thorough they've been. They go on to talk about what Silver Lake have promised. In addition to the big chunk of cash up front, they say they're going to substantially increase New Zealand Rugby's fan base and engagement, develop world-leading innovative content, develop new direct channels to fans, platforms, aggregators, social platforms. All this stuff, by the way, totally needs to be done to bring rugby properly into the 21st century. Gather fan data and personalised experiences for fan engagement, invest in technology, execute better on the current core revenue streams, media rights, sponsorship, licensing, merchandising, and adjacent areas. And as I say, they say, we accept executing on these issues will require capital and new talent, skills, and relationships. But note that they should be pursued, and these initiatives, should they be pursued, are open to development by New Zealand Rugby without selling a 15% income generating assets. And remember, Silver Lake are a private equity firm. They don't have a team of people for all these different things they're saying they'll do instantly available. They'll need to build a team that do it. So the players are saying, could we build our own team? They also talk about the cost of capital investment at the minute, and I'll get onto that when they talk about their alternative idea. So they talk about control. And basically, they just say, look, there are unintended consequences when you give away control. I mean, one of the reasons you get a podcast from me, JB and Phil and Egg Chasers every single Monday morning, 7 seasons and counting, 52 weeks of the year, is because we are not beholden to anybody. There is no one turning a financial tap on and off. And I've seen it happen with others. They only do a podcast when someone's paying them to do it. When the money goes, there you go. It happened. Same thing happened at Manchester Rugby Club when I played there. Loads of players came for the cash. Money dried up. Players went. Team bombed down the divisions. So there are unintended consequences. And that's one of the things we love about Egg Chasers. Is also, no one can tell us, oh, guys, you can't talk about that. You can't say that. We can do what we want. No one's telling us what to say and when to say it. They talk about risk. And this is the bit I love the most, I'll be honest. Have a listen to this. The relationship between New Zealanders and All Blacks, the Black Ferns and other representative rugby teams is difficult to put into words, but we all understand it to be a special bond related to New Zealand pride and identity. New Zealand's rugby players play for themselves, their family and their country, with a commitment to success that is demanded by history and required by legacy. New Zealand rugby's fans understand this commitment and see it in the essence of what, from one perspective, it means to be a New Zealander. That country is like no other in rugby terms. Fiji, Tonga, Samoa would be as well. It's like a religion there. You can't imagine being in the UK following a minority sport as rugby is here. So they're absolutely right in saying this. This is above all what New Zealand rugby is selling and Silver Lake are buying. 129 years of history and talent and results that record extraordinary success achieved only because of who we are and what rugby means to us. Damn right. No one else has done it. No one else could have done it. I believe that as well. We believe there is a risk that this special bond and the nature of what it means to be New Zealanders, players and spectators alike is at risk in the proposed transaction. That phrase, some people know the cost of everything and the value of nothing. There are some intangibles that you can't quantify, but you take those away and it all crumbles. They also talk about Maori and Pacifica culture, which is woven deep within the fabric of New Zealand rugby's brand, reputation and revenue generating assets. And they're just wary of people exploiting that in some way. They use the phrase perceived cultural misappropriation, given Silver Lake is an Anglo-American private equity firm. Some people, maybe money men, would say this is woke nonsense. I just think this is being keenly aware of what's made New Zealand rugby such an attractive proposition to a company like Silver Lake in the first place and trying to preserve that. They talk about conflicts of interest. Just saying that, look, might seem all great now, but there'll come a time when it could cost us in other ways. And they use the example of World Rugby, who had a £6 billion deal in front of them from that Swiss marketing agency to develop a Nations Cup with one aligned global calendar. And the concept failed partly because it would have forced the countries that compete in the Six Nations to abandon their deal with CVC. So you're welcoming private equity, you might limit what you could potentially do in the future. Careful what you wish for. They do come up with an alternative approach because, again, they say, yes, we know you need money. Get it. We need some money because we want to put some infrastructure in place, develop things in place, bring the game into the 21st century so it can be more profitable for us. And they've said, right, here's how we can make some money. 1, you don't need to sell a stake in the game. We can just borrow. And a lot of governments around the world are doing this because money is cheap right now. So if you take a long-term approach, you use money to make more money. You might cover what it cost you to borrow the money in the first place in the long term. This is JB's area of expertise. He'd be able to explain this much, much better. But so I won't get into that. I'll just say that's what they're saying. 1, why don't we borrow money and make a company that does all those things you want to do ourselves with all the expertise, talent and platforms, and then not have to lose a 15% stake. We can keep it all for ourselves when it becomes successful, as you're saying it will. Another way, they said, well, we could include the New Zealand public in raising some of this capital with bonds. So they say paying bonds issued to New Zealand public. 2 types of bonds. The first, like premium bonds in the UK, where you issue low individual bond amounts and bondholders would enter a regular draw to win a prizes. So basically it's like, all right, we need to raise some money. We can go to private equity and get that cash, or Do you want to put in for a raffle so we can fund it and you might win something? The relationship that rugby has in New Zealand with its public, I think they would definitely do this. There's probably not many countries in the world that could. New Zealand is definitely one. The second idea is not like the bonus bonds. It's more like Patreon. We have patreon.com/eggchasers. We have people that support the work we do and help us to put on live shows and stuff by getting that expertise. And as a result, they get some perks, access to live tickets, shirt giveaways and things like that. And they're saying we could do that as well. And again, not many countries in the world could do this. New Zealand absolutely could. And there's the end of the letter. Again, I've just given you a whistle-stop tour of that particular letter, but and I'd highly recommend you going and reading it yourself. I just really love that these players have really thought about that. They haven't just come up with a problem; they've come up with solutions as well. And they've thought the fundamental overriding thing that the New Zealand players are saying is maybe private equity is the way to go. Maybe there's no way around it. But before we sign off on it, let's exhaust all other options first because of what it could cost us in other ways in the future. Interesting to say that John Kirwin, a New Zealand rugby legend, has said the players should trust in the governors running the union. They say that players aren't playing and clubs are dying around the country. It's interesting to see that participation and grassroots clubs are really struggling in New Zealand as well. And John Kirwin says leveraging private equity of the national team to fund grassroots with an injection of cash. Now, I'm not against that idea generally. What often tends to happen when private equity comes into the equation is it ends up leading to a little layer of bureaucracy and inflated pay packets for players and administrators and stuff. But if it was actually going to grassroots, I can see the merit in that. But what is a union? At the end of the day, the rugby, I was a little bit annoyed in a way that the CVC deal with Six Nations was just signed off by the RFU unilaterally, when actually the RFU only exists because of all of the individual members at all of the grassroots clubs around the country. And we're whose need, and the people whose needs and wants are meant to be represented by the union in the first place. So I think that's what the New Zealand rugby players are doing, and I absolutely love the tone they've taken on this one. I'm definitely going to be watching how this one plays out. See you on the next video.